Good day, ma'am. So for today's reporting, I will be discuss chapter 4, which is about attitudes and attitude change. So let me introduce myself. I am Erwin Custodio Alok, 21, from DevCom 3B. So this chapter concentrates on the processes involved in the development of and change in social attitudes. It also features a short section on a special attitude of significance, which is yung prejudice. Roman number 1, which is yung definition. Attitude is the intensity of positive or negative affect for or against a psychological object. A psychological object is any symbol, person, phrase, slogan, or idea toward which people can differ as regards positive or negative effect. So, for further understanding, in our community, every one of us has an attitude. So, yung attitude natin, magdedepende kung maganda or masama, kung negative or positive, depende sa kung papaano natin tratuhin ang isa't isa at kung papaano yung interaction natin sa kanila. So, para maging mas malinaw, halimbawa, sa isang classroom, kung ang isang teacher ay hindi nagpapakita ng magandang ugali, let's say, siya ay terror, siya ay hindi marunong magbigay ng konsiderasyon regarding academic matter or issue, then, syempre, as a student, yung interpretation mo towards the attitude of the teacher is negative. Let us proceed to the next slide. People have an attitude toward practically everything and everyone in the world. So sa slide na to, naniniwala ako na no matter who you are and no matter what culture and what your tradition are, I believe that every one of us has an attitude toward a specific thing or a specific person. Dahil disappointed ako sa nagdaang 2022 election results, yun yung gagawin kong example. Ako, bilang isang estudyante and a future leader, kung papalarin man in the near future, yung naging attitude ko toward the results of 2022 election is negative and disappointed at the same time. So, bakit ako disappointed? Bakit ako negative? So, alam niyo naman na karamihan sa mga nanalo ay hindi deserving in their respective position. And karamihan din sa kanila ay napatunayan na may corrupt practices. But then again, nabigyan na naman muli ng kapangyarihan na mamuno. And it because dahil ang ilan sa atin ay hindi educated, sorry for that term, hindi educated with regards to political matters or political issue. And also, the main reason why these things happen is because hindi aware yung ilan nating mga kababayan about sa background nila. Diba? They have spent time thinking about and they have undoubtedly expressed opinions about many subjects. Our opinion is our attitude put into words. An attitude is a way of responding to someone or something. It is something we have learned and it's relatively permanent. So, naalala ko din last election, I used to be active sa aking social media account, particularly sa Twitter. I express my opinions, my constructive opinions on Twitter about different parties, about their platforms and their programs na mailalatag nila when they reach the point na nanalo sila sa election.
kung nakakatulong ba or hindi sa sambayan ng Pilipino. So, ina-assess ko yung opinion ko, hindi lang basta siya opinion. Let us proceed to the next slide. So, sa slide na to, sinasabi na yung attitudes natin ay binubuo ng tatlong mga elemento. Kung ano yung iniisip natin, ang tawag sa element na yun is cognitive component. Sa kung ano naman yung nararamdaman natin, ano yung pakiramdam natin sa isang bagay, ang tawag naman doon sa element na yun is emotional component. And sa kung paano naman natin i-act, kung ano yung nasa isip natin, at kung ano yung nararamdaman natin, ang tawag sa elements na yun is behavioral component. Let us proceed po sa next slide. Roman number 2, which about development of attitudes. So, sinasabi lang sa slide na to na may mga iba't ibang mga theories na naglalaban para ma-explain yung formation ng mga attitudes. So, sa mga next slide, explain yung mga theories na yon at kung paano siya nakatulong sa pag-formation ng attitudes ng isang tao. Letter A, some theories on how attitudes are developed. So, yung unang theory, which is yung learning theories. So, according sa theory na ito, yung attitudes natin is talagang natututunan natin through times. Let us proceed to the next slide. Learning by direct experience. Many of our attitudes are learned by direct experience with the attitude object. For example, sa mga magkakapatid, dahil matagal na magkakasama, alam na natin yung ugali at ang attitude ng bawat isa. So, personally, mas gusto kong kasama lagi yung ate ko kasi mabait siya compared dun sa kuya ko na hindi ganun kagandahan ng ugali at tamad pa sa bahay. So with that, yung ibang mga attitude ko talaga ay natutuhan ko mula sa ate ko, which is yung maging mabait, maging mahinahon, at masipag sa gawaing bahay. Lahat ng yun, natutunan ko yun mula sa ate ko. So, it is indeed that yung attitudes natin ay talagang matututunan natin direkta dun sa experience natin, dun sa attitude object niyo. Learning by direct experience. If you meet someone, your attitude toward the person will be strongly influenced by the impression you form. So, it's being stated na yung attitude natin towards person ay pwedeng ma-impluwensyahan base sa impression natin sa tao na yon na nabuo sa isip natin. Para mas malinaw, noong first year ako, I used to be active. Sobrang bipo ko talaga to the point na nagtatanong ako sa mga seniors namin regarding a subjects and teachers. Then, isa sa magandang halimbawa na magde-describe sa slide na ito ay yung time na tinanong ko yung senior ko about their former teachers. I asked them kasi na sa mga naging instructor nila, sino yung pinaka-worst, sino yung pinaka-matapang, at sino yung pinaka-terror. And with that conversation, sinabi niya sa akin yung name ng teacher. From that moment, yung attitudes ko towards dun sa teacher na yun, kahit hindi ko pa man siya nakikita, ay nakabase sa nabuong impression sa utak ko while I'm talking to my senior. So, nung second year na ako, yung teacher na yun ay naging instructor namin sa isa sa major subject namin. Dahil nga yung nalaman ko na terror siya, na matapang yung teacher na yun. So, yung naging attitudes ko every time na may synchronous session kami ay kinakabahan ako, takot ako, at hindi ako mapakali kasi baka magpa-recite siya, tapos hindi ako makasagot, tapos kapag ganun, tahiyain ako sa buong klase. So, ang lala. So, ayun nga, yung attitude natin toward the person ay pwedeng ma-impluwensyahan ng impression na nabuo sa utak natin. Letter B, learning through association. Classical conditioning. When a neutral attitude object is consistently associated with some object that naturally evokes an attitude response, classical conditioning occurs. After repeated pairings of the objects, the previously neutral attitude object becomes a conditioned stimulus and elicits the same attitude response that the conditioned stimulus does. So, for further understanding and para mas malinaw sa inyo, I have here the YouTube link na magde-describe at mag-explain kung paano nangyayari yung letter B, which is learning through association. It's the classical conditioning.
Classical conditioning is a way of learning where a stimulus that triggers a biological response is paired with a new stimulus that then results in the same reaction. The most famous work in classical conditioning was done by Ivan Pavlov in the 1890s. During this time, Pavlov did a lot of research around the digestive processes of dogs. One day during his research, Pavlov noticed that the dogs began to salivate in the presence of the technician who normally fed them. He wondered if the technician was a trigger that stimulated a response associated with food. To find out, he constructed an experiment that would allow him to measure a dog's output of saliva. First, he served the dog food. Then, he served food while playing the sounds of a metronome and repeated the process a few times. Finally, he removed the food and only played the metronome. The dogs began to salivate in response to the metronome alone. Pavlov concluded that if a new stimulus was present when the dog was given food, then that stimulus became associated with food and caused salivation on its own. When he published his findings, Pavlov called the food an unconditioned stimulus because its effects on the dog were not learned. Instead, they triggered an unconditioned response that happened naturally and completely out of the dog's control. The metronome is at first a neutral stimulus. Through the process of repetitive pairing with food, the dog learns to connect the two. This means that the neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus, and the response to that, a conditioned response. He also reported that 1. Learning occurred most rapidly when the interval between the sound and the appearance of the food was short. 2. The saliva produced by the sound differed in composition from that produced by the food, which means that the conditioned response was not an exact replica of the unconditioned response. 3. While there are several forms of conditioning, such as forward and backward conditioning, classical conditioning cannot create new behavior or be used for training, but instead triggers involuntary biological responses. 4. We can almost entirely undo the conditioning. This happens through extinction when we repeatedly present the conditioned stimulus in the absence of the unconditioned stimulus. So, what occurs inside the brain? When a dog sees the food, the signals from the eyes and nose stimulate the brain, which activates the salivation glands to secrete saliva to aid the dog with the digestion. When a dog hears a sound, the ears send a signal to the brain, which takes note but has no reason to activate anything. When the two different neurological processes are being activated simultaneously, new synaptic connections occur between the auditory stimulus and the behavioral response. Over time, these synapses are strengthened so that it only takes the sound to activate the pathway leading to salivation.
Learning through reward, instrumental or operant conditioning. This is one of the most powerful ways in which past behavior toward an object can affect attitudes. We are rewarded or reinforced with praise, approval, friendship for expressing some attitudes and punished for expressing others. Rewarded or reinforced attitudes tend to be held more strongly and the action is likely to be repeated in the future. In other words, an attitude consistent with the behavior is likely to accompany the increase or decrease of behavior toward the object. Dito sa learning through reward, sinasabi na ito ay isa sa mga pinakamakapangyarihang paraan kung saan ang nakaraang paugayon ng isang bagay ay maaaring makaapekto sa mga saloobin. Tayo ay ginagantimpalaan o pinapalakas sa pamamagitan ng pag-aproba, papuri at pagkikipagkaibigan. Para naman sa pagpapayag ng ilang mga saloobin, at parusahan para sa pagpapahig sa iba ng mga gantimpala o pinapalakas ng mga saloobin, ito ay may posibilidad na maging mas mahigpit ang aksyon ng isang tao at malamang maulit ito sa hinaharap. Sa madaling salita, ang isang saloobin ay naaayon sa pag-uugali at ito ay isa sa mga rason kung paano ka makikitungo sa isang bagay. Learning by observing others. Social or observational learning. Children observe how others, parents, peers, teachers, television characters evaluate people and model their own attitude after those expressed by these important role models. If parents constantly express racial or religious prejudices, for example, their children are likely to develop similar attitudes unless other models, the media peers, teachers demonstrate different attitudes. But social learning is not limited to children. Your attitude towards someone may be strongly influenced by what your role models below students that you like and admire. Dito sa learning by observing others, pinapakita dito na sa pamamagitan daw ng pag-oobserba, natutunan ng mga bata na suriin ang pag-uugali ng isang bagay o isang tao sa pamamagitan ng pag-obserba. Halimbawa na lamang dito, kung nakikita ng bata na maganda ang ipinapakita ng magulang, maaaring ma-adapt ito ng isang bata at yun ang magiging ugali niya patungo sa ibang tao.
Forming attitude by balance. Balance theory. Balance theory was developed by social psychologist Prince Heider in 1946. This theory was originally developed to explain patterns of interpersonal relations, but it has also been applied to study attitude and opinions about many items such as physical objects, ideas, or events. So, in-explain ni Heider na dapat uniran ang balance sa pagitan ng interpersonal na relasyon para sa pagitan ng dalawa o higit pang individual upang makamit ang pagkakasundo. The POX triangle was developed Heider to examine relationship. Each corner at the triangle represent of different elements. Pag P is like, pag O is like, pag X, the three elements. A triadic relationship is thought to be balanced when it includes either no or an event number of negative relations. POX model can be either positive or negative, and this is what can determine if a relationship is balanced. Sa pamamagitan ng triadic POX, posibleng positive at negative ang ugnayan mula sa kung ano ang nakikita ng tao sa partikular na bagay, at ito ay maaaring matukoy kung balance or unbalance ang isang relasyon. For example, 3 positive na relasyon, ito yung tinuturing na balance, pati na rin 2 negative at isang positive, ito ay tinatawag na balanced state dahil parehas silang comfortable sa isang bagay. Kapag 1 negative at 2 positive, ang tawag dito is unbalanced, at saka 2 negative at 1 positive, ito ay unbalanced din. Ito yung sitwasyon na hindi comfortable sa isang bagay. There are 2 types of relationship dynamics taking place in a triadic relationship, which is unit relationship, sentiment relationship. Unit relationship, this is how much the different elements of triangle belong together. So sabi dito, unit relationship, ito yung pagkakaiba ng element sa triangle na pinagsama ng marami upang maging balance. Ang sentiment relationship naman, how one feels about something categorized as either liking or disliking. So, ito yung nararamdaman ng isang tao tungkol sa isang bagay, alinman sa gusto ayaw niyang gawin. Self-perception theory. Self-perception theory proposes that just as we must figure out other people's internal state, such as their attitudes by observing behavior, we often infer what our attitudes are by watching our own behavior. Pag sinabing perception theory, ito yung napapansin natin sa ating pag-uugali. Na kalamitan, hinihulaan natin kung ano ang ating mga salupin sa ating sarili sa pamamagitan ng pagmamasid sa ating pag-uugali o kaya naman pagmamasid sa ating iba tao napapansin nila ang pagbabago sa ating pag-uugali.
Moving on to the next topic, letter B, developing attitudes, environmental factors. Our family, especially our parents, has a great deal of influence on our attitude development. During our early years as a child, parents have control most of the things that we can do or we cannot do. First, they can control most of our rewards and punishments. They can control access to things we like, and they can force us to do things that we do not like. And as a child, we are indecisive. So, kailangan natin ng parental guidance. And in turn, yung parents natin yung nagde-decide most of the time kung ano ba yung mga dapat nating gawin at mga hindi dapat gawin. Sila rin yung nag-i-impose ng punishments and rewards kapag meron tayong mga nagagawang bagay na favorable or hindi favorable para sa kanila. Their smile of approval and frown of disapproval are of a great importance. Noong mga bata pa tayo, pag nagpapaalam tayo sa kanila, minsan hindi na sila nagsasalita. Ang ginagawa na lang nila, nagsismile or sumisimangot, ibig sabihin, dun pa lang sa gesture na yon, malalaman natin kung approved ba sila sa mga hinihingi natin or disapproved ba sila. Tapos, in turn, yung attitude na yun, nagpo-form yun para sa atin ng belief na parang kailangan na muna nating hingiin yung permission para sa kanila na may mga bagay tayong gagawin na dapat in favor sa kagustuhan ng ating parents. Kaya malaking factor yun kapag gumagawa tayo ng mga bagay-bagay kasi iniisip natin kung ano yung magiging dating nun para sa parents natin. Next, they control a portion of information that reaches us which result the formation of our beliefs and attitude about things. So, syempre, yung parents natin nag-i-impose ng mga do's and don'ts para sa atin. Katulad na lang ng clothes preference natin ng mga bata pa tayo. Sila yung nagdadamit sa atin. Minsan tayo yung pumipili, pero in the end, sila pa rin yung masusunod. Kapag minsan pipili tayo ng mga, halimbawa, babae ka, pero pipili ka ng 6-pocket na shorts or polo shirt na panglalaki para sa'yo kasi feeling mo comfortable yun para sa'yo. Yung magulang natin, sasabihan tayo, hindi para sa'yo yan. Panglalaki yan. So, dun pa lang, ma-form na yung beliefs natin na, okay, itong specific na clothing na to is para lang sa lalaki at itong specific na clothing na to is para lang sa babae. That's the example na formation of our beliefs and attitudes towards things. But there is an extraordinary influence na nagsistand out sa lahat ng yon. They establish initial categories and that categories are resistant to change. Siyempre, may na-impose na sila na first beliefs and attitudes para sa atin. Kapag na-expose tayo sa panibagong beliefs and attitudes, mahirap nang i-accept yun para sa atin. Kasi nasanay na tayo sa ganong beliefs and attitudes. Kaya mahirap na sa atin mag-accept ng mga panibagong bagay na nakikita natin or naririnig natin. Next is number 2, the influence of reference groups. For all we know, meron tayong 4 basic units of society, which is family, government, school, and church. And in these units, meron tong in common. Sa bawat unit, meron tayong nabubuong peers or often serves as a reference group against which our attitudes and values can be compared. These peers can be categorized among the units. In school, it could be a group of friends, colleagues, and organizations. In families, your cousins or your relatives who's closest to you. In government, also in organizations or associations. In church, your church mates. or the priest and your choir members, like that. They all have a say in the formation and development of your attitudes. They all have different sets of information that they can induce to you, but all in all, you are involved in your peer because you have something in common. For example, nung high school pa tayo, dyan tayo nag-form ng iba't ibang group of friends or ng peers. Sa bawat group of friends, meron silang specific na attitudes and beliefs na nai-instill sa'yo. Halimbawa, napasama ka sa group of friends na mahilig mag-aral. Mataas ang chance na ma-impluwensyahan ka nilang mag-aral din or maging conscious sa academics mo. Or pwede rin na ma-involve ka sa group of peers na mahilig mag-billiards or mahilig gumala. Mataas rin ang chance na ma-impluwensyahan ka rin nila na maging isa sa kanila. So oftentimes, the peers has a lot more to say to you. And oftentimes, madjudge tayo kung sino ba yung sinasamahan nating barkada. Kasi most of the time, sila yung mas may malaking impluwensya sa attitudes natin towards things and on the life per se.
The third subtopic of attitudes and attitude change is the function attitudes may serve, or we may say attitude serves for major functions for individual. And that functions are the following. Number 1 is understanding or knowledge function. It is said that an attitude can act as a schema or a way to structure the world so that it makes sense, thus serving an understanding function. So of course, kapag walang attitude ang tao, the world makes no sense. Kaya nasabi na an attitude can act as a schema, or in other term, is a representation para magkaroon ng kabuluhan yung mundong ginagalawan natin. For example, your attitudes about political issues provide you with a frame or reference while evaluating political candidates. So, proven naman na kahit nung nakarang election tayo, we have this attitude na we tend to evaluate political candidates. And if candidates support issues toward which you have positive attitudes, you are likely to respond more favorably than if they argue against those issues. So, like for example, personally, you support death penalty kasi nakikita mo siyang a positive way to end crimes in the Philippines. So when evaluating those political candidates, you found out na they also support death penalty for the same reason na nakikita mo why this has to be passed at gawing batas. It is said that you are likely to respond more favorably dun sa certain issues. Kumbaga dahil nakita mo na sinusuportahan din nila yung isang bagay, which you have positive attitude, mas lalo kang pumapabor on that certain issue. Furthermore, an individual should know the nature of people and things around him to become a functional member of the society. So every individual needs to understand the external world in a meaningful way, and that's how understanding or knowledge function works. Second is instrumental social adjustment or utilitarian function. In many cases, appropriate attitudes allow us to identify with or gain approval from those around us. Of course, even in our daily lives, if we have appropriate attitudes towards someone, we always gain approval, or kumbaga, we gain good image from those people around us. The expression of certain attitudes may be rewarded by important persons such as parents, teachers, employers, and friends. It may be called instrumental conditioning, or being rewarded by that certain attitude we have. Attitudes that allow a person to achieve rewards, identification, or approval are serving a social adjustment function. So, yung attitude na meron tayo that allow us to achieve reward and approval for those people around us are serving social adjustment function. Parang it help us na matutunan mag-adjust dun sa environment na kinabibilangan natin, kaya tinawag na social adjustment function. Moreover, the attitudes that are developed function to satisfy people's utilitarian needs by drawing them toward those individuals who have rewarded them in the past and avoiding those who have provided punishment. Parang in this adjustment function, attitude helps people to adjust to their environment, and to be well adjusted in an environment means to be able to receive pleasurable or rewarding experiences from others and to avoid punishment or unpleasant experiences from others as well. So, for example, in a gathering sa isang restaurant with your classmates, bawat isa sa kanila, they order the same type of food because they prefers it, and in order for you not to look weird or unadjusted, you go with the choices of your classmates rather than expressing your own choice type of food. Kumbaga, para hindi ka ma-out of place or weirdo, you adjusted sa pagpili ng food. The rewarded attitude of your action is that dahil nag-adjust ka, bilong ka sa kanila, you choose to maximize pleasurable experience and minimize unpleasant experience in that situation. So these attitudes help us to adjust to the environment we live in. It serves the utilitarian concept of maximizing reward and minimizing punishment.
Ego defensive function. Ego defensive function is an attitude that protects one's self-esteem or reflects a person's unresolved personality problems or emotional conflicts, such as unexpressed aggression or fear of losing status. As defense mechanism, attitudes allow people to protect themselves from acknowledging unpleasant basic truth about themselves, and it shields the self of the ego from inner conflict. An ego defensive attitude, by its nature, is not grounded in a realistic perception of the attitude object. Yet, it assumes that the person holding a negative attitude is largely unaware of its ego. An ego defensive function refers to holding attitude that protect our self-esteem or that justify actions that make us feel guilty. Examples of defense mechanism attitudes. Denial. This involves a person not recognizing the reality of a stressful situation in order to protect themselves from overwhelming fear or anxiety. Distortion involves a person believing something to be true when it's not. Projection involves a person accusing someone of having thoughts or feelings that they themselves are having. Dissociation involves feeling disconnected from a stressful or traumatic event or feeling that the event is not really happening. Repression involves avoiding thinking about something to block out painful or uncomfortable feelings, emotions, and impulses. Reaction formation involves acting in a way that contradicts unacceptable or anxiety-provoking thoughts or feelings as they arise. Displacement involves a person feeling that they cannot express a negative emotion toward a particular person, so they direct those negative emotions towards someone else. Intellectualization involves a person using reason and logic to avoid uncomfortable or anxiety-provoking emotions. Rationalization, the action of attempting to explain or justify behavior or an attitude with logical reasons. Undoing, a person tries to cancel out or remove an unhealthy, destructive, or otherwise threatening thought or action by engaging in contrary behavior. Sublimation, mature type of defense mechanism in which socially unacceptable impulses or idealization are transformed into socially acceptable actions or behavior. Compensation, people overachieve in one area to compensate for failures in another. Value expensive function, Attitudes help people give a positive expression to their central values and core aspects of their self-concepts. Expressing such important attitude is inherently satisfying and reinforces a sense of self-realization and self-expression. The role an attitude can play in the expression of core values. For example, a person might adopt a positive attitude toward a religious symbol because that symbol is associated with important religious values. It has been said that values are more general than attitudes. A person has many thousands of attitudes but only several dozen values.
There is a speech style that mostly uses by women that is commonly effective to persuade men, and that is a tentative speech. So what is tentative speech? A tentative speech is a speech that appears to enhance a woman's ability to persuade a man. At the same time, that it reduces her ability to persuade another woman. So the common example for tentative speech that we commonly use at the beginning of our speech are the following. The first one is, I know I'm not an expert on this issue, but blah blah blah. Or maybe we could do it, or maybe we could forget about it, and so on. Based on the following example, it is obviously mean that tentative speech is a speech style that's using powerless speaking. We women commonly convince men by using this style because women have typically lower social status than men. So by using this technique, we are showing some respect for men while sharing our suggestions, opinions, or perspective on certain issue or topic. But it doesn't mean that women should always adopt this kind of speech style just to persuade men, because it may produce a bad impression for us women, and it may also affect our skills to persuade other gender other than men. So why it may also affect us women if you just want to show respect for men? Because some men convinced by a competent woman. A woman who have more confident and directly stating her opinions without hesitation. So I'm going to give you an example where Carly and her co-workers on 1995 suggested a technique for women to convince or persuade her men audience. So their suggestion is this. Women need to combine assertive language with a social non-verbal style that communicates friendliness and affiliation. What do we mean by assertive language? So that is a speaking style that shows how confident a person is in terms of language. He or she might say their opinions, suggestions, and perspective direct to the point. So how about the non-verbal style? It is a technique in communication to attract the attention of your audience and for them to feel comfortable with you, so that you may easily convince them by your opinions. Some examples that women can use while communicating with are relaxed forward-leaning, smiling, or moderate eye contact. This kind of non-verbal style is the one that men want to see from a competent woman, because they likely to communicate and be persuaded by a sociable, competent woman than a woman who is only competent but do not have skills in social communication, or in other terms, or in other words, they are not friendly. So after the discussion about the three aspects of the communication channel, let us now move forward to the aspects of communication itself. So there are 7 aspects of communication, and the first one is the appeals to emotion. So let me read a definition of the first aspects of communication. According to this, we can identify these aspects if the certain things makes us feel good, and attitudes can be formed by simple association with good feelings. If we think that we are comfortable with something and we feel happy, then it may convince us to do it also, or to use that also. Just like in advertisements, we are convinced by the products if it shows positive feelings. For example, on radio and television, the pleasant association can be made with music. This may help us to feel the positive vibes because everyone loves music. We may have a good feeling with products because of that kind of advertisements. Thus, it may convince us to buy it.
Number 2 of aspects of the communication channel, we have delivery speed. So, research indicates that people who speak rapidly are generally more persuasive than those who speak more slowly because fast talkers convey the impression that they are more credible. Basically, sinasabi lang dito na ang iniisip ng mga tao kapag fast talker ka ay tama ka or mas credible yung sinasabi mo kasi nga dire-diretso lang yung pagsasalita mo. But, is fast talking beneficial to persuasion? Well, according sa hypothesis na kapag mabilis mag-deliver ng speech ang isang communicator, mahihirapan ang mga listeners na i-process yung messages since hindi nila masyadong ma-analyze yung message critically. So if an audience opposes to the point of views of the communicator, that audience would likely to be persuaded by the communicator using a rapid speech. In contrast, kapag naman ang isang audience ay in favor sa viewpoints ng communicator, tapos rapid pa rin yung pag-deliver ng speech ni communicator, fast talking will hurt the persuasive power. Bakit? Kasi masyadong mabilis yung pag-present sa kanila. E di ang mangyayari, hindi sila magkakaroon ng time to compare it to their belief, which are a possible support sana doon sa paniniwala nila pareho ni communicator sa isang issue. Number 3, speech style. When people use a powerful speaking style, they are generally judged much more competent and credible than when their style is powerless, even when people have good and persuasive messages. So, kung ang delivery speech ng communicator ay nagko-convey ng impression sa audience na their messages are credible, ang speech style naman ay generally judged as more competent and credible. So, even a communicator has a good persuasive message. If the speech style is powerless, then some people might not be persuaded at all. Ibig sabihin, importante ang speech style kapag magpe-persuade ka ng mga audience. Research also suggests that the communicator's sex may, under certain conditions, reverse the effect. Ayon kay Linda Carly in 1990, she found that when women tried to persuade men to change their attitudes, using powerless speech was more effective than employing a more assertive style. So, kapag ang babae ang communicator, tapos gusto nilang i-persuade ay lalaki, they tend to use a speech which is powerless speech kaysa sa pagiging assertive style of speech. Kasi yun yung mas effective in terms of persuading men. And when trying to persuade other women naman to their point of view, breaking with convention and adopting a more powerful speaking style was found to be more influential. So, kung sa lalaki, kapag babae ang communicator, the communicator tend to use the style of powerless speech. And kapag naman babae ang ipipersuade ng babaeng communicator, they use the more powerful speech style. Kasi mas effective yun.
The aspects of communication. Number 1, appeals to emotion. Certain things make us feel good and attitude can be formed by simple association with good feelings. They can also be changed this way. In any advertisement, the good feeling is created by a visual such as photograph, pleasant scenery, people having an enjoyable time. The association with a pleasant scene is deemed to be sufficient. So, itong number 1, ito yung parang yung appeal mo, yung appeal ng emotion mo, like kung ano yung mararamdaman mo sa mga bagay na nakikita. Doon nakadepende yung attitude or reaction mo. Like nakakita ka ng magandang painting, syempre para kang para kang maa-amaze. So yun. The second one is the arousal of fear. The attitude change increases with greater fear, but only up to a point. At some magnitude of fear arousing, we simply may refuse or be unable to cope with the information we receive. Attitude change will follow a fear-arousing communication only if people will know what to reduce their fear. An intense degree of fear is aroused by communication. The panic that is experienced may interfere with people's ability to take action to make certain the dreaded event will not happen. In that case, attitude change may not be expected to occur. Okay, so this one po ay kung kanina kung paano ka mapiplease ng isang bagay, yung parang siyang positive kanina, yung number 1. Then ito yung pagpasok ng takot. Yung takot na nakaka-apekto sa emotion at sa pag-uugali or attitude ng isang tao. Like for example, you were asking someone na ikinag-guilty nila. Right? Syempre, magbabago yung tone nila, yung way of communication nila, yung pananalita nila. Para silang natitense. Kasi merong takot na nabuo dun sa isip nila na naka-apekto dun sa attitude nila. Pero sinasabi dito na pwedeng makontrol kung gugustuhin ng isang tao. So, yun. Number 3, organizing the communication. Determining whether a message will be persuasive has to do with whether you present a one-sided or a two-sided message. A one-sided message is when you try to convince others by presenting only your arguments, while the two-sided message involves you acknowledging opposing arguments in your speech and attempting to refute them. So in this part, ito na yung way of communicating. Merong one-sided at two-sided. Yung one-sided is like parang ikaw lang yung magbibigay ng idea or sa'yo ng lugar. Hindi sila sasagot. Wala sa kanilang makukuha, kundi sa'yo lang. Yung two-sided, yung nagkakapalitan kayo. Like, yung argument mo, tatanggapin muna niya, and yung argument niya, kailangan mong tanggapin. So, para magkaintindihan kayo. For issues which have two sides, presentation of only one side of this issue is a fact that increases persuasiveness. It is best to present your side of the argument first. So, yun nga yung sinasabi ko na kung makikipag-communicate ka, dapat yung sa'yo muna. So, ginawa nila yun noong sinasabi dito ni Carl Holland 1949. So, madam natin si attempted to determine whether one-sided messages were more effective audience persuaders. Their objective was to convince American soldiers that war was far from over. One-sided appeal was most effective to those who believed that the war was far from over, whereas a two-sided appeal worked better with those who initially believed that the war would be over soon. So, there's a pride between one-sided. No between. Only on one side. But, meron pagkakaintindihan between two-sided. So, ginamit nila yun noon na pag one-sided ka, parang magtutuloy-tuloy lang yung argument, walang matapusan. Pero pag two-sided, tanggap yung isa, bibigay yung isa, tatanggap yung kabila, bibigay yung kabila. So, ganun. Later, found out that two-sided appeal was more effective in such circumstances. Mentioning the opposition's argument may suggest that you are being an objective, fair-minded person, which increases your trustworthiness and your effectiveness at persuasion. So, hindi porket one-sided ay magaling ka namang persuade. Pero, sinasabi dito na mas effective yung two-sided kasi magkakaintindihan kayo. Saka yung pag two-sided ka, fair-minded ka kasi you are not biased. You need to listen to the other side and you also need to listen sa kabila.
Drawing conclusion. Message whose conclusions are explicitly drawn are more persuasive than those whose conclusions are left to the audience, especially when the audience is unintelligent and or uneducated, or when a message is complex. Censorship. The general tendency is that if communication is censored, the greater likelihood that people are drawn to it and be changing their attitude in the direction of this communication. 6. Resistance due to forewarning. The sneak attack. Some of the most effective messages are those whose purpose is disguised until virtually the last minute. If there is advance notice or forewarning, this can allow the person to forearm himself with arguments he knows he will hear in the communication. 7. The medical model resistance due to inoculation. The human mind can be immunized against attempted persuasion in much the same way that body resists attacks by disease. Certain of our attitudes, researchers argue, exist in a relatively germ-free environment. These are our cultural truisms which are rarely, if ever, exposed to attack.
Good day everyone, my name is Mary Joy De Leon and for today's presentation, I am going to discuss the aspects of communicators. To start, we have the three characteristics of the source of communication. The first is the credibility. The credibility depends mainly on the two factors which are the expertise and the trustworthiness. Let me explain first the expertise. It is defined as the extent of knowledge that the source appears to have. As a source of communication, you should be knowledgeable enough to the topic that you are communicating. You must have the knowledge kasi if wala, what would be the sense of it? If you are in front and discussing something that you know little or nothing about, edi mawawalan din ng sense yung mga sinasabi mo. It will not matter to the audience that you are talking to. Now to the second, which is the trustworthiness. It refers to the source intention. Dito naman sa second factor, as the source of communication, you have to appear sincere and have no personal gain. You must show an honest attitude. As a communicator, hindi lang dapat na alam mo yung mga sinasabi mo, but at the same time, the words that come out of your mouth are true. So for credibility, you have to have knowledge about what you are communicating and a sincere attitude towards it. Now for the next characteristic, we have the attractiveness. Communicators' attractiveness to the audience is based on several factors. As to what we have here, the physical appearance, pleasantness, likableness, and similarity to the audience. When you are good looking, you will attract people, as to what we have learned on chapter 3 in interpersonal attraction. Because people tend to assume that beautiful people have more desirable traits, for this includes the pleasantness and likableness. When you are good looking, parang the first response ng tao is to like you because also for years they are treated favorably. And people often associate positive attributes to good-looking people, which is why physical appearance is a big factor in attracting audience. In addition, we tend to like people who are similar to us. Kaya nga, di ba, kalimitan the circle of friends that we have ay mayroong one or more similarities sa atin. A disliked communicator is usually ineffective in changing people's attitude, unlike likable communicators who produced attitude change. Dahil syempre, kapag mayroong similarities yung communicator sa audience niya, yung mga audience is mas napapanatag. They feel somehow connected to them. Hence, the communicators trying to communicate is being appreciated the way she or he wants it to be.
In continuation to the discussion of Ms. De Leon, next is we have the power. If the source has the power to reward or punish the target, wants the target to agree and will find out if the target did agree, then the target is likely to be influenced. Consider the degree of conformity in a large corporation. Junior executives may express opinions that are remarkably similar to those of the boss. The boss' social power has molded the subordinate's attitude. But is this really attitude change or this merely compliance to the boss' opinions without any internalization? It probably starts out as only compliance, but research evidence suggests that over time, attitudes that initially reflect compliance can become internalized and accepted privately. It means that there is evidence to show that compliant attitudes may become internalized and accepted privately, even if that wasn't the case at first. Moving on is we have the aspects of communication channel. Three aspects of the communication medium that have been investigated deal with the effectiveness of face-to-face communication, the speed in which the message is delivered, and the style of speech that is used. First is we have the face-to-face versus media influence. Second is the delivery speed, and last is the speech style. So for the first, face-to-face versus media influence, research has found that face-to-face communication is generally more effective than mass media communication. Most politicians campaigning for public office spends great sums of money in television and radio ads to reach a wide audience. But they also realize that face-to-face encounters with the voters make their message more salient, personal, and attractive grabbing. Which is very true. It is easier to be understood and to understand the other person when we are communicating face-to-face because the experience is, for lack of a better word, and a higher resolution. Facial expression, body language, and nuance are more readily observed in person than they are online. I always preferred face-to-face interaction because I can see from body language what is going around. Instead, online, people can play a role and you can never be sure about the real intentions. The one disadvantage of face-to-face encounters is that a person can only deliver his message one place at a time to a limited number of people. Using the mass media, the same person can reach millions. Diba, when one politician is campaigning face-to-face, they can only deliver their message in one place at a time and they need to repeat it after they move in another place. Unlike in social media, they can reach millions of people in just one click. Aside from that, there is no opportunity for replays or pausing. We, the listeners, is evaluating their message as they speak. A slight slap in concentration by the listener can distractly distort the meaning of the message. Among the mass media channels, print media, like newspaper and magazines, are better at conveying complex persuasive messages, whereas radio and television are better at persuading people when the message is simple and relatively easy to understand. So the next is delivery speed that will be discussed by the next pair.